They say that blood is thicker than water, but in the Miller household, money was the only thing that mattered. My name is Sarah, and for 22 years, I lived in what everyone called a dream life. I lived in a mansion with floor-to-ceiling windows, I went to the best schools, and I wore clothes that cost more than a common man's monthly salary. But that house wasn't a home, it was a golden cage. And the man who kept the key? My father, Arthur Miller. Arthur was a titan in the corporate world. To the public, he was a visionary, a man of integrity. To me, he was a shadow that darkened every room he entered. He didn't raise a daughter, he raised a project. From the moment I was old enough to understand numbers, my father had me sitting in board meetings, taking notes on acquisition deals I didn't even understand. He didn't want a companion. He wanted a successor who wouldn't question his authority. I remember my 8th birthday, the day my mother passed away. While the house was filled with people paying their respects, I was sobbing in the corner of the library. My father didn't come to comfort me. He didn't hold me. Instead, he walked in, looked at me with those cold, piercing blue eyes, and said, "Sarah, grief is a luxury we cannot afford. We have a meeting tomorrow morning about the logistics contract. Dry your eyes, get some rest, and be ready at 7 a.m. That was the day I realized that my father didn't love me for who I was. He loved what I could do for his legacy. As I grew older, the pressure only intensified. My friends were chosen by him, my subjects in college were dictated by him, and my hobbies were merely things he thought would look good on a resume. I felt like a ghost, haunting my own life, waiting for a chance to finally breathe on my own. I had a dream my father would have laughed at. I wanted to build something sustainable, something that helped people rather than just sucking money out of them. I had spent my nights in college secretly working on a tech-driven logistics platform. I knew that the world was moving toward automation, and I knew that Arthur's old-school, manual labor-focused empire was slowly becoming a relic of the past. But I couldn't tell him. To him, my ideas were childish games. The breaking point arrived on my 22nd birthday. It was supposed to be a grand celebration, a party that would introduce me to the elite as the heir apparent. I was dressed in a gown I didn't pick, standing in a room full of people I didn't know. My father walked up to me, glass of champagne in hand, and smiled. But it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sarah," he said, loud enough for others to hear, "I have a gift for you. I've finalized a partnership with Marcus Thorne. We've signed the contracts. You're marrying him in 3 months." The world stopped. Marcus Thorne? The man who was known for his ruthless business tactics? A man who viewed people as objects? I felt a cold chill run down my spine. "Father," I whispered, pulling him aside, "you can't do this. I don't love him. I don't even know him. This is my life, not your business deal." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You are a Miller, Sarah. Your life does not belong to you. It belongs to this family. You don't get to choose your happiness. You get to fulfill your duty. If you want the luxury of this name, you do exactly as I say." That was the moment the cage door finally broke open in my mind. I realized that if I stayed, I would be a prisoner forever. I looked him straight in the eyes that held no warmth, and I felt a spark of something I had never felt before. It wasn't fear. It was clarity. "I won't do it," I said, my voice steady. "I won't be a part of your transaction." His face went red, a vein pulsing in his forehead. He didn't scream. He didn't have to. He was a man who believed he held all the power. He just pointed to the front door. "If you walk out that door, you walk out with nothing. No money, no name, no protection. You will be dead to this family by morning. Do you understand?" I looked at the house, the mansion that held nothing but painful memories. I looked at the party, a room full of masks. And then, I looked at the door. I walked out, and as the heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, the cold wind hit my face. It was the most beautiful feeling I had ever known. I was homeless. I was nameless. But for the first time in 22 years, I was free. The first month after I walked out was a brutal awakening. I went from silk sheets to a thin, stained mattress in a damp basement apartment that smelled of mold and neglect. Every morning, the sound of the city traffic replaced the silence of the mansion. My designer dresses were sold to pay for a month's rent, and my elegant heels were traded for work boots. I took 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. I scrubbed floors at a local gym, served coffee at a busy diner, and worked the night shift at a logistics warehouse, the very job my father would have considered a fate worse than death. My coworkers were tough. They didn't care about my past or my surname. To them, I was just Sarah, the girl who was always tired but never complained. But while they rested, I was building. Every night I would come home, my hands aching, and open my laptop. The screen light was my only companion. I wasn't just working, I was studying. I had access to the industry records I used to analyze for my father, and I began to identify the gaps in the market that the big giants, including Miller Dynamics, were ignoring. The corporate world was changing. Everything was moving toward AI-driven efficiency, but companies like my father's were too proud, too slow, and too arrogant to adapt. They were still using manual systems that wasted millions. I saw the weakness. I saw the opportunity. I started coding my own platform, Nexus Solutions. It was a logistics tool that could predict shipping routes and optimize costs with 90% more efficiency than current market standards. The path to Nexus was not easy. I faced rejection after rejection. I walked into offices, my suit jacket slightly frayed, trying to pitch my idea to investors who only cared about pedigree. "Who are you?" they'd ask. "You don't have a track record. You have no funding." They didn't see the fire I had in my soul. They didn't see the years of training I'd had under Arthur Miller's thumb. But I didn't give up. I realized that my father's greatest weakness was his belief that he was the only one capable of innovation. He had stopped learning. I, on the other hand, was hungrier than ever. It took me 2 years, but eventually I landed a small contract with a local manufacturer. It wasn't much, but it was enough to prove the concept. I poured every cent I earned back into the business. I lived on instant noodles and coffee, working 20 hours a day. I didn't have a social life, and I didn't have a family, but for the first time, I had a vision. As Nexus grew, I started playing a game of shadows. I didn't want to just compete. I wanted to be the one holding the strings. I began monitoring Miller Dynamics. I followed every report, every stock market fluctuation, and every internal mistake. Arthur was struggling. He was losing contracts because his costs were too high, and he was too stubborn to modernize his fleet. He was firing loyal employees to cover his losses, and the company's morale was at an all-time low. I started buying small portions of his company's stock. I didn't buy under my own name. I used shell companies. Month by month, block by block, I was secretly taking ownership of the very thing he claimed was his legacy. It was a dangerous, exhilarating game. Each time the stock price dipped because of a bad decision he made, I was there to buy the dip. I remember the night I reached the 10% threshold. I sat in my small office, which was now much nicer than the basement, and toasted a glass of cheap sparkling wine to the empty room. I wasn't just a former daughter anymore. I was a stakeholder. I was a player. And I was coming for the throne he had built on my broken dreams. I knew that the day would come when he would need a savior, and I would be the one walking through the doors of his boardroom to collect what was owed. The day finally arrived. It was a Tuesday morning, overcast and gray, just like the day I had left home 10 years ago. But today, the air felt different. I wasn't walking away. I was coming home to claim what was rightfully mine. Miller Dynamics was in shambles. The news outlets were reporting on the company's impending bankruptcy. Arthur Miller, once the king of the industry, had run out of options. He had called an emergency board meeting to present a mystery investor who had offered a last-minute bailout. He had no idea that the mystery investor was the daughter he had declared dead to the family. I walked into the headquarters building. The security guards didn't recognize me. They saw a woman in a sharp charcoal gray suit, radiating confidence. The receptionist looked up, startled, as I strode past her toward the elevators. I didn't need an appointment. I was the one who controlled the fate of this building. When I opened the heavy double doors of the boardroom, the room went silent. The atmosphere was suffocating, thick with tension and the smell of expensive coffee and failure. Arthur Miller sat at the head of the long mahogany table. He looked older, his shoulders slumped, his face lined with the stress of his collapsing empire. When he looked up and our eyes locked, I saw the exact moment his world shattered. He didn't recognize me at first, and then slowly, the realization dawned on him. The color drained from his face until he looked like a ghost. "Sarah?" he whispered, his voice cracking. The board members exchanged confused looks. I didn't answer him. I walked to the head of the table opposite him. I pulled out the chair designated for the lead investor and sat down. I opened my portfolio, and the sound of the pages turning was the loudest thing in the room. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice calm and powerful. "Thank you for waiting. Let's discuss the future of Miller Dynamics." Arthur slammed his hand on the table, trying to regain his authority. You have no business here. You're just a girl who ran away. Security." I didn't even flinch. I just looked at him with a pitying gaze. "The security works for the majority shareholder, Arthur. And as of this morning, I own 51% of this company. I am not here to beg. I am here to lead." The room erupted in whispers. I laid the documents out on the table, the records of his secret debt, his failed contracts, and the proof of his majority stock transfer. I had bought him out from under his own feet. He was defeated, and the board members knew it. They looked at the documents, then at Arthur, and finally at me, the woman who had come back to save the company from his arrogance. "You have two choices, Arthur," I said, my voice cold but fair. "You can resign voluntarily and keep your dignity, or I will turn these files over to the federal investigators for the accounting fraud you committed to hide your losses. You choose." The pride that had defined him for decades finally broke. He looked around the room, hoping for support, but he found none. The board knew that I was the only one who could turn this sinking ship around. With a shaking hand, he picked up the pen and signed his resignation. He stood up, but he didn't look at me. He just walked out of the room, a man who had lost his name, his power, and his daughter all at once. Today, the office has changed. We don't operate on fear anymore. We operate on innovation and respect. And Arthur? He still works here. I gave him a job in the logistics department, the very department he used to say was beneath a Miller. He spends his days in a cubicle, answering to managers who once feared him. He has to report to the people he looked down upon for years. I didn't do it to humiliate him. I did it so he could finally understand what it's like to build something from the ground up without the weight of an ego. I often stand by my office window and look at the city, remembering the girl who once walked into the rain with nothing. I learned that you don't need a legacy to be someone. You need the courage to walk away from what hurts you, and the discipline to build what defines you. My father taught me how to be a corporate shark, but he forgot to teach me that the tide always turns. If you are going through a dark time, if you've been told you're nothing, remember my story. Never let them break your spirit. Keep working in the shadows, keep building your empire, and never, ever lose sight of who you are. The tables will always turn if you have the patience to stand your ground. Thank you for listening to my journey. Don't forget to subscribe if you believe in justice, and always keep fighting for your own future.